Hello everyone, I'm Primal Wijesekera. I'm going to talk about how we can use the context to improve the current permission models. We can use context not only to increase the efficiency in terms of protection, but also to reduce the user burden. I don't think I have to tell you how bad the current permission models are, because most of the last two talks was just talking about that. But let me quickly recap how the Android permission models evolved over the years. So when Android started, they had the permission model ask on install, where it forced users to make a privacy decision during the installation. A lot of previous work found out that most of the users didn't pay attention at all. And then even more people, that they couldn't understand what they are granting permission for. And most importantly, this permission model lacked the context. When a user granted permission, the user didn't know when and how these permissions are going to be exercised in the real world. So to their credit, a few years ago, Android introduced the permission model ask on first use, which prompted the user whenever an application requested a permission for the first time. So to their credit, it's actually, it gave a better sense of the surrounding context when they deny or allow a given permission. But the issue with that is ask on first use seek the user consent only once, only at the first occurrence. And then they are just using that response in all subsequent instances, just disregarding the context. So our previous work found out that its inability to account for context has grave consequences. So how we can give the user a better context? Ask on every use is one option that we could look at. But again, as one of our previous work found out that some of these requests occur like 200 times per hour. So it's simply impractical to ask the user on every single use case. But then again, in the same study, we found out that 80% of our participants actually wanted a final level control so that they can dynamically allow or deny permissions. So as platforms need to find out like the middle ground where they can protect the user privacy, user data, while not burdening too much, avoid the risk of user habituation. So in an idealistic setup, users should only be prompted when they are likely to care about that particular question. If you ask too many benign questions, it's going to habituate the user for future questions that could be more concerning or more sensitive. Or when the system doesn't know how to act on behalf of the user. So by involving the user in the process, by prompting them, not only it makes sure that the platform will not make a wrong decision, it will also help the platform to make the right decision in future scenarios, in future similar instances, without involving the user. And the most important thing to remember is that context matters. So what is the context? Vaguely defining, context could be how the user understands her surroundings, what the user is trying to do when a request is made. So Helen Nissenbaum has written extensively on the notion of contextual integrity, where she posits that how a user perceives a given permission request entirely depends on the surrounding context. So one of our key goals in the project is to figure out, identify, and understand what are these contextual cues users are using, and how those contextual cues are impacting their end privacy decisions. So for an example, if a user is using Yelp to navigate or find for a restaurant, the user is more likely to expect Yelp to access location. And then, however, if Yelp is trying to access location, if the user is trying to, say, use a banking application or any financial application, user might not expect that behavior from Yelp and might want to be prompted by the platform to let them know that there's a request going on like that. So one case is expected and another instance is not accepted. So it's imperative that we understand when the user is likely to care about a question, because we don't want to habituate them. If we habituate them, it's going to reduce the quality of they are just going to click through the prompts. So the main objective of the work that I'm going to present is to explore the feasibility of using machine learning to predict users' privacy expectations, so that the platforms will can figure out that when to prompt the user or when to take the decision automatically. So to explore that the avenue, we conducted a field study to collect the ground truth. Participants in our study used a heavily modified Android platform for a period of 6 weeks. So the modified platform collected all sensitive permission requests originated from third-party applications, and then the contextual information surrounding those permission requests. And we also logged spectrum of behavioral traits, like their audio preferences, their locking patterns, their locking habits, how often they let the screen to time out versus how often they actually manually lock the screen, or whether they have any locking mechanism or not, and their browsing habits, how often they visit a secure website, how often they get warning on the mobile phone. And while looking all of this data, we also probabilistically prompted each user once a day on a selected permission request. As you can see on the screen, the prompt mentioned the application that just requests a sensitive resource and the type of resource that it requested or accessed. And the most important question, if they had the option, how they want to behave, how they want to react, whether they want to deny it, whether they want to allow it. So these responses served as the ground truth for the classifier that I'm going to explain later. So we used a research panel called Fawn Lab in University of Buffalo, through which we recruited 133 users. And then, so they used the modified platform from 4 to 6 weeks. And at the end of the study, we have collected more than 175 million events. Just 96 million out of that is permission requests. That translates, during the study period, on average, each user had a sensitive permission request once in every 6 seconds. And then we have collected more than 4,000 prompt responses. Again, these prompt responses were saying that they wanted to allow or deny a particular permission request. So based on the collected data, based on our prompt responses, we were able to simulate previous and current permission models. So on ask on install, permission model had a staggering error rate of 75%. In the current market, still around, when I last checked, around 85% of users are still using ask on install. So during the study period, we also prompted each user multiple times on the same combination of application permission. So we knew when they were prompted first, what was their response. And we knew how they responded on subsequent prompts for the same combination. So that's ask on first use. So based on that data, we were able to simulate the ask on first use, and then it has an error rate of 15%, which means 15% of the time, the current Android permission model could not meet users' expectations. It's a significant improvement over ask on install, which was the previous model. But based on our latest data set, ask on 15% error rate means it is likely to commit an error once in every minute. So the likely scenario is that when they were prompted for the first time, they responded the prompt in a particular way based on the surrounding context. But in subsequent cases, when they were prompted, those contextual circumstances were changed, and they actually wanted to vary their decision. But that variation, that nuance, was not captured in ask on first use. So we need to do better. We need to do better at protecting users' data. So as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to explore the possibility of using machine learning. So the use of machine learning has two key objectives, like can we better account for factors that users are actually using to make privacy decisions, like contextual factors. And can we, while increasing the protection, can we actually reduce the user burden? Can we actually reduce the user involvement? So the feature set that we use can be grouped into 3 distinct categories. The first one is permission information, more like metadata on a permission request. The type of the permission, which relates to the type of the resource that's being requested. Visibility means whether the requesting application is running visible to the user or not, and time of the day of the request. And their behavioral traits, their browsing habits, their audio preferences, their screen locking habits. So both of these categories did not require any user involvement to collect. All of these data were passively collected through the modified Android platform. And based on the prompt responses, we also measured their contextual preferences. You know, how they want to vary their decision based on whether they knew the requesting application running on the phone versus when they didn't know the requesting application running on the phone. And how they want to react to a permission request when they were using Facebook or a gaming application versus when they were using banking application or any financial application. And then we came up with 2 models. The first model based on permission information and their behavioral traits, which we are going to call the behavioral model. The other model is permission information and contextual preferences, which we are going to call that contextual model. And we use the ask on first use as the baseline to compare our numbers. So ask on first use had an error rate of 15%, and the model based on behavioral data had an error rate of 24.9%, which is not the perfect number, which is not ideal. But the significance of this observation is that ask on first use, on average, during the study period, would have had 12 prompts to reach an error rate of 15%. But the model based on behavior did not require any user involvement because all of the data that was used in the behavioral model were passively observable. This is an interesting observation that we can exploit this avenue further on to reduce the user burden or the user involvement in any permission model during the learning phase. So the contextual model based on permission data and then the contextual preferences had an error rate of only 3.2%, which is an 80% reduction compared to status quo or the ask on first use. Even more significant is that the ML model only needs the same amount of user prompts as in ask on first use. So we have the same user involvement, but we had a significantly superior error rate, superior accuracy rate. So if you think that the 12 prompts is like higher, then we should have a little more. That even we reduce the number of user prompts, we still get a superior error rate. We get a superior accuracy. So in the paper, we actually in detail talk about different prompting strategies, how we can actually vary the accuracy with the user prompts, with the number of user prompts, which I'm not going to delve into in the interest of time. But if you want more information, we can talk offline or refer the paper. So what's the takeaway message here? As it was predicted many years ago by Helen Nissenbaum through the notion of contextual integrity, people do make contextual decisions. Their privacy decisions are dependent on the context because the contextual feature group were the most predictive. So if the platforms want to do a better job protecting user privacy, they need to start accounting for these factors, for these contextual cues users are usually using. So for the current study, we are using 2 main features: the foreground application the user is using when the request is made, and the visibility of the requesting application, whether the user had any clue that the requesting application is running or not. We believe this is an interesting first step towards understanding the impact of the context and to further studying along that area. So going back to the first question that I raised, like how to figure out when is the right time to involve the user, prompt the user to make the privacy decision. So when the model produces the decision, it also produces the confidence score. So if we have if the confidence score is high enough, higher than a particular threshold, we can just let the platform to act on behalf of the user. It can automatically deny, or it can automatically allow the permission request. But if the threshold is below certain, if the confidence score is below certain threshold, then we can involve the user, then we can prompt the user. So this involvement again will make sure that the platform will not make the wrong decision and then violate users' expectation. It also helped to help the model to retrain and then make sure that in future similar scenarios, it can take the right decision without actually involving the user, so that it can reduces the user burden. So what did we learn today? As we predicted, the machine learning actually helps to increase the efficiency. It helped to increase the accuracy to 97% compared to the 84% by reducing the error rate by 80%. So the other significance in that observation is that while it increased the efficiency, it also helped to reduce the user involvement, reduce the user burden, which is significant because it avoids the risk of user habituation. And contextual cues actually help. The users are making contextual privacy decisions, so whatever the permission model, whatever the strategy that we are going to take in the future, they need to take these contextual cues into account. These contextual cues were indicative because their users are more likely to be consistent under different contextual circumstances. And right now we are just using foreground application and visibility. So, but we think there's more research needed to understand the fully extent of the impact of the context. At last, the behavioral traits. As I mentioned earlier, even though behavioral traits didn't have the ideal set of accuracy numbers, but the behavioral model did not require any user involvement. It's just started predicting with 0 user prompts. Whenever it sees a new user, it can start predicting with that accuracy. So there are so much work needed to figure out what are the actual set of behavioral traits that could be more indicative, that could be more helpful. And then this is even more significant in the domains of IoT, or any area that the user involvement is very restrictive or none. In IoT devices, you don't have the luxury of just prompting the user every single time or whenever you want to. So they can start using behavioral traits to learn about users' privacy expectations and start protecting their privacy. Thank you very much.
We have time for a couple of questions.
Ethan Johnson, University of Rochester. So I was just wondering if you have considered the possibility of having maybe a time limitation element to the flexibility you're giving the users. So I'm picturing something like the UI web browsers give you for clearing your history. They say clear history from the last 5 minutes, the last hour, or that sort of thing. That would, I think, align with a fairly common use case for user preferences where maybe they want to grant permission only when they're doing a specific activity. Have you thought of that, or considered how that would fit into this framework?
So if I get your question correctly, you're saying that just set a privacy setting for a time period.
Right, like this app wants to use your location, grant it for the next hour.
So the current model implicitly does that. So since we are using the foreground, whatever the request that occurs during that particular application, say Citibank. So if the user is using Citibank, every request that occurs during that period, ML will see the foreground application is a Citibank. And if the user has been like very restrictive in the past, when he was using the Citibank, the ML will be very restrictive as long as the user is using Citibank. So implicitly, the ML model is actually acting in such a way. But we haven't like specifically done anything to make sure like we have like time lapse.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, my name is Raj. I work in the McAfee Research Group. Thanks for the great talk. I just had one question. So how does your contextual model handle the variations in privacy decisions that users might make for applications that have permission prompts coming as intent-based triggers? For example, in WhatsApp, you may have the permission prompt coming up when you click on the microphone button to send a voice message, versus applications that don't really have intent-based triggers for permission prompts, applications which just after install time would just give a series of permission prompts one after the other, where a user might be more hasty in terms of giving the permission access, just to get to the application's utility, versus being more careful when giving permission access to applications that offer intent-based triggers.
So just to make sure that, so are you asking like, can we handle intent-based permission request?
So does the contextual model currently handle intent versus non-intent based?
So the modifications we have done to the platform handles like content-based, intent-based, and direct functional request. They all, we can monitor all three types of permission request and then react to it. So even whenever someone sends an intent, the new Android model checks whether they have the respective permissions, and then that triggers our ML to react. Yeah. So to your question, yes.
Thank you.
Last question. Okay. So Seda Girses from University of Leuven, previously from NYU, where Helen Nissenbaum, the author of Contextual Integrity, is. And we're actually doing a survey of computer scientists using contextual integrity, and we've been very much following your work, and we think that you expand the theory. There is, however, one difference between how you interpret CI and how Helen has written it, which is that for her, context matters in the sense of the social sphere and what is appropriate to express there. And the classical example she gives is, let's say you have a health condition. Let's say you have athlete's foot, right? You don't break out and talk about it during dinner with your colleagues. But if you go to the doctors, it's very appropriate to start talking about the details of your illness and what could be done to treat it. It would be also inappropriate if your doctor would start talking about whatever conditions they're having, right? So it's that kind of social norms. So I'm wondering if in your study you've looked really at privacy protection in the sense of not just as what users expect, but what is appropriate in that context. So is it appropriate for Yelp to take your biometrics versus Chase or whatever the bank is, to take your biometrics? And if that would maybe also help improve your machine learning.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I've heard that example a lot through Helen. Yes, so there is a paper actually 6-7 years ago in Auckland, operationalizing contextual integrity. So in that, if you can, so as you said, so it might be inappropriate to talk the medical history with the doctor at dinner, but it could be appropriate at a different setting. So as you can see, we don't have the application as a feature at all, because the application doesn't matter. The doctor doesn't matter. What it matters is whether the doctor is playing the correct role at that particular context. So here, the contextual preferences are capturing whether not the agent that it receives the data, whether the role is appropriate to receive the data. So the role could be, so for some applications, the visibility is actually hinting the user whether the application is playing the correct role or not. So if the application is running visibly, the role is more likely to be expected to receive that data. But if it's running invisibly, that role might be more like a passive listener, so it's probably inappropriate to receive the data. So if I got your question correctly, I think we are trying to align on that. And then actually in the paper, there's a separate section that we try to explain all of our feature selection based on the contextual integrity. And then the importance of the role, not the agent, is one of those things that we discussed.
Thank you.
Okay, let's thank the speaker again.